Well, I've got a big update on Yemen today. It's been quite some time since I've talked about the war in Yemen. There's been so much going on in the United States and other parts of the world that I haven't had time to focus on little old Yemen. But it's still as terrible of a war as it's ever been. It's been going on for many years now, and many thousands, untold thousands, have lost their lives. And for most of this war, your sides have stayed relatively stable. You've had the north, which was largely controlled by the Houthis, who are in the capital of Sana'a currently. They've been there for many years. They pretty much marched right in at the start of the war, and nobody's been able to kick them out since. Now the Saudis and the UAE don't like the Houthis, and they've been trying to reinstall, they've been trying to get rid of the Houthis. It's not entirely clear who they would replace the Houthis with. But within the opposition to the Houthis, there are two major factions, one armed by the Saudis and one armed by the UAE. The first faction armed by the Saudis is the government in exile, which was the government in Sana'a, which fled the Houthis when they originally took over the capital in the north. And then you have the Southern Transition Council, backed by the UAE, and they are Southern Separatists who want nothing to do with the North. And this is important because obviously these folks have no interest really in retaking Sana'a. That's really only the goal of the government in exile. And so they have been much more interested in recapturing their old capital, which was Aden. For those of you who don't know, before the end of the Cold War, South Yemen and North Yemen were two different countries. The capital of North Yemen was Sana'a, and the capital of South Yemen was Aden. And at the end of the Cold War, South Yemen was a communist country, and I guess seeing it as being vulnerable, the Ba'athist government of North Yemen decided to invade South Yemen and just incorporate it into their state. So essentially, the government of Yemen, of unified Yemen, was pretty much the government of North Yemen. And after so many years of fighting in this civil war on the side of the government in exile, the Southern secessionists have decided that they're done fighting on the same side as Northerners, and they're just going to try and recapture all of the South, which is where their forces are based anyway, and reestablish their state. So the first step to doing this, of course, is retaking their capital, Aden, which is a port city. It was a crown colony of Great Britain for quite some time. Aden historically has been a pretty prosperous city relative to the rest of Yemen, and it also has been where the government in exile has been based since they were kicked out of Sana'a. That is, until the Southern Transition Council decided they had had enough, and that they kicked them out. And now the government in exile, I don't know where they're based out of, but wherever it is, I don't know, they might have fled to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, but they are not in Aden or Sana'a. They've lost both of the historic capitals of Yemen. And so we have infighting now on the anti-Houthi side of the civil war. You essentially have a civil war within a civil war. You had a civil war between the Houthis in the north and the government in exile and the Southerners in the south. But now the Southerners are pushing the Northerners out of their coalition, and they're saying, no, we can do this on our own. The Southerners probably don't even care that much about the Houthis. They'll negotiate with them and give the Houthis whatever independence they want, because the Southerners want nothing to do with where the Houthis live. And they are, of course, backed by the UAE, which has been feuding with Saudi Arabia, the backers of the government in exile. And, of course, the government in exile is still trying to talk tough, even though they really have no leg to stand on at this point. They do control a significant amount of territory, but, of course, without a capital, they do look kind of feckless. And they are unwilling to negotiate with the Southern Transition Council unless the Southern Transition Council surrenders Aden as a way of starting the negotiations. So they give up their one bargaining chip, which of course isn't going to happen because not only do the Southerners need Aden to rebuild their southern Yemen state, they need to that's the only thing they can negotiate away in any sort of peace talks with the government in exile. So if they give away Aden to begin with, they have nothing to negotiate. They just be unilaterally surrendering. And interestingly enough, Jason Ditz of antiwar.com points out that this is actually the same policy that the government in exile has pursued with the Houthis, and we see where that's gotten us. a civil war that's gone on for years and years. They refuse to negotiate with the Houthis unless the Houthis, surrender all their territory, which isn't going to happen. And so, if the Saudis are trying to fight a two-front war, they're fighting against the UAE-backed southern separatists in the south and the Houthis in the north. And so things just got a bit worse for Mohammed bin Salman. He's been fighting this war for years, not of course personally himself, but sort of directing people to go off and die in this war. It was kind of his baby. This was supposed to be the way that MBS was going to prove to the world that he is a foreign policy expert. This was even before he was the crown prince, and this war is still going on. It's a complete failure. And he doesn't feel like he can pull out because it's a point of pride for him, but at the same time, there's no way he can win. In fact, his position keeps getting weaker because now, he couldn't even beat the Houthis with the help of the Southern Transition Council. Now he's got to fight the Southern Transition Council and the Houthis with a fighting force that is relatively the same size as the Southern Transition Council. And frankly, the government in exile has been using a lot of Islamist mercenaries, from what I understand, folks from different countries, and also Yemenis who are kind of Al-Qaeda affiliated, who don't like the Houthis or the Southerners, it would seem. And the Southern separatists have, you would think, a more dedicated following of people who want to start a new country, who aren't just fighting, because they're getting paid. So I'm skeptical if the quality of the fighters that are claimed to be affiliated with the government in exile really is as strong of a fighting force as either the Houthis or the STC. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.